Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, September 23rd around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the Tennessee and Utah games. We got a ton to get to, so we're going to kind of pile these up throughout the segments, but we'll get to Tennessee, Oklahoma, as well as Utah, Oklahoma State, so stay in the state of Oklahoma for the first segment. Then we'll get into Michigan, USC, as well as Illinois, Nebraska, so we'll go up to Big Ten country and get into those two games that were really, really fun this past weekend. Then we'll get into a little bit of an upset alert. There were a number of upsets and very, very close upsets in this weekend that I want to get to. Before we get to the top 25 teams, just round up how the rest of them did this past weekend, and then we got a whip around. There are a ton of games that we have to get to, and we'll likely continue into tomorrow, but a ton to get to. Really, really fun show for you all. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super thanks feature at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network channel. Just click that little $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, and it'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely something I'd like you guys to utilize throughout the season, just to make this a little bit more interactive. I want this, guys, to be as much your show as it is mine, so definitely want you guys to utilize that. Also, you can use the GSMCpodcast.net page if that works a little bit easier for you, but sometimes that super chat is very, very easy. But let's go ahead and jump into this, because there were a ton of big-time games this past weekend, but we'll start in the state of Oklahoma, knock out these two first, and we'll start with that Tennessee game over in Norman, because this one was interesting. There were a number of different things that happened in this game that did not go the way that I thought it would, but Tennessee does get a 10-point win, 25-15, and Tennessee's defense is the real deal. That's the biggest takeaway I have from this. They were all over the place. That O-line is a big-time problem for Oklahoma, and as well as that quarterback, which we will talk about here in a second, but that Tennessee defense was relentless. They were absolutely incredible, and as we all know, that was the one real thing that was standing in the way of Tennessee 2 years ago from making a real run. Now it's very much handled, and they look just incredible on that side of the ball. OU does have a quarterback controversy to figure out, and frankly, I don't know if it's too much of a controversy. I think Michael Hawkins Jr. has to be your guy going forward, just from the standpoint of he's a more dynamic runner. He's the one that can kind of disguise that O-line troubles more than Jackson Arnold, so I think you got to go forward with him. I don't necessarily think it makes your offense all that more dangerous, but at the very least covers up for that O-line that is a little bit of a nightmare right about now. And then you got Tennessee. I think Tennessee kind of took their foot off the gas late in this game. I think they knew what they had. They knew their defense was playing incredibly well, and they decided, let's run the ball. We also were out 2 tackles, which will definitely be something to watch down the road for them. But overall, it was one of those things where it felt like Tennessee kind of had this one in hand and sat on the ball just a little bit. Not necessarily because of a ton of incredible reasons overall. I think the biggest one was the OU defense was playing really well, and they had a couple of injuries that they didn't want to tempt fate, but overall, there was no real worry. Tennessee's defense was playing so well, they were doing so much on the defensive side of the ball that the offense didn't really have to stretch themselves. They made a couple of big plays, but other than that, they did exactly what they wanted to do on that day on the defensive side of the ball, and that was plenty for sure. But let's get into how Tennessee was able to get this one done. And it was the defense. It was absolutely incredible what they were able to do on that defensive front. In particular, they just pushed around OU's offensive line for the entire night. Had 34 carries for 36 yards for Oklahoma, 2 forced fumbles, 1 interception for Tennessee. Just remarkable stuff from this defense. They were all over the place. Also got a safety. So they did plenty of stuff on this day. No doubt about that. They were really incredible. And one of the big-time reasons that Tennessee is a team that's not only dangerous in the short term or on the offensive side of the ball, they're dangerous in terms of the national title because of how well they play on defense. They're one of those teams that you're going to have to watch going forward because they're really, really, really good. And then hit a couple of huge plays. That was really all that he needed. They were without their 2 starting tackles. Lance Hurd came into the game was not in the game to begin with, and then John Campbell left early in the game. So they had a lot of stuff they had to worry about, and felt like they hit a couple of big plays, had the touchdown to Thornton of 66 yards to go up 10-3, hit a couple of big plays to Brew McCoy, but more than anything else, just ran the ball. Didn't necessarily run it super efficiently or really aggressively or anything like that, but did enough on the ground to make those plays. And that's really all that matters when you're playing an Oklahoma team that can't get anything going offensively. Just run the ball, hit those couple of big plays, and you'll probably leave with a win. So a huge thing for Tennessee there, and showed how much they've grown under Josh Heupel from that team that needed 55 points to beat an elite team. Now you only really need 25, and you really only needed 16 on Saturday. And then OU leaving points on the board was probably the biggest theme of this entire game. There were multiple different moments where Tennessee gave the ball away. OU would give it right back, literally on the very first play. Tennessee had 10 points off 3 turnovers from OU. OU, on the other had 0 from 2 turnovers from Tennessee, and there were only 2 plays. They gave it right back to Tennessee and allowed them to get back on offense. Oklahoma just didn't really give themselves much of a shot on the offensive side of the ball, and that was a number of different reasons. Jackson Arnold not making great decisions, the O-line not being good at all, the play calling from Seth Luttrell being a little bit all over the place, so there were plenty of reasons that OU left points on the board, but can't do that against Tennessee, that is for sure. And then, where do these teams go from here? I think for OU, I think you know what you have at quarterback. I think Michael Hawkins is going to be your guy going forward, although I think Jackson Arnold has the higher ceiling. With that offensive line, you're not going to be able to really make plays if you don't have a guy that can extend plays, can make something happen with his legs, and Hawkins does a better job of that. So I think that's your quarterback going forward if you're an Oklahoma fan, and you probably feel pretty good about that. A very gritty guy that played really good ball towards the end of that game, although there were some different defensive changes from Tennessee. Really impressive stuff from Michael Hawkins, and I expect him to be that guy going forward. On the other side of the ball, your defense is one of the best in the country. They played really good football on Saturday, and although I do think Tennessee probably could have scored a touch more in this game, I do think Oklahoma posed a lot of trouble, and I think they're one of those teams they're going to give you a shot. They're going to give that offense a shot pretty much every single game of the year. They just have to be able to meet them. The offense just has to be able to at least meet them halfway, because they have 5 games against the top 14, and only one of them is a true home game. So it's going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of things that Oklahoma has to figure out, and if they don't figure it out in a hurry, especially on that offensive line, it's going to be a really long season for Sooner fans, that's for sure. And then Tennessee kind of just proved to me that they're a title contender. I think there was a little part of me that was still holding out, just making sure that everything was above board with this team, with some of the teams they played in the past, but they did exactly what I didn't expect them to do in this game. That's why I think they might just be a title contender, because they didn't win the way that Tennessee normally wins. They didn't win the way that we would expect them to win in this game, throwing the ball all over the field and being explosive and doing all the things that we've become accustomed with Tennessee. They ran the ball 52 times. They threw the ball 21 times. They knew exactly what they wanted to do in this game, and it wasn't exactly Tennessee football. They played incredible defense. Tim Banks and this defensive staff are just incredible, and huge shout out to Josh Heupel for handling all of that, because definitely 2 years ago you would have been crazy if you thought that they were going to walk into Norman and give up only 15 points, but that's exactly what they did. Really incredible job from him, and a game that I know meant a lot to him. There was a really cool moment after the game where he was giving his speech. I promise you, if you think that this sport is only transactional, go ahead and watch that speech, and you'll definitely think differently. But this is an SEC title team. They have everything in front of them. Play Georgia and Alabama coming up, so big-time games. But this is a really impressive team that just got a really impressive win. And we're going to have to roll through this one just a little bit quickly. Utah got a big-time win at Oklahoma State, and Utah just continues to be one of the most consistent, impressive, stable programs in the entire country. Morgan Scaley and that defense were downright special on Saturday. May have been one of the best defensive performances of the entire weekend, even with that Tennessee performance we just talked about. And then you have Ollie Gordon. Ollie Gordon just cannot get anything going. He looks, more than anything else, he looks tired, I'll be totally honest. He looks like a guy that had a lot on his shoulders last year and just can't keep it up through this year. Had 11 carries, 42 yards, and was just non-existent, really, for much of this game. And it's one of those things that if they don't get that figured out, then it's going to be a really long season for Oklahoma State. And then huge shout out to Isaac Wilson. It was a far from perfect game for this kid, but he made just enough plays. Hit a huge pass to Brant Kuthi, had 2 interceptions in this game, and was still able to bounce back. Did a number of really good things that I think made a lot of Utah fans excited for the future. Obviously, quite a ways to go for the kid, but did a really, really incredible job just handling all of the craziness around this game, and especially the atmosphere that he was playing in front of. And then how did Utah win this one? Physical advantage was the biggest one that I saw, because when we were talking about Utah kind of going over to the or from the Pac-12 to the Big 12, the big question I had was, can they impose their will the same way they did in the Pac-12? Because that was what they did in the Pac-12. They just absolutely battered teams and ended up coming out on the right side of things. Seems like they can do that in the Big 12, because they absolutely took Oklahoma State to the woodshed for a lot of these games. Oklahoma State had 15 carries, 48 yards on the ground, just absolute domination. And more than that, I mean, even on the back end, Utah was way more physical. Pretty much every single position on the field, Utah was more physical than Oklahoma State in this game. And then you forced Alan Bowman to beat you. Everyone knows that once you get into conference play, there's going to be some things that you're just going to want to do against this Oklahoma State team. The biggest one is just force that quarterback to beat you. I think Alan Bowman has taken some steps forward. If he doesn't have that offense or that running game and offensive line in front of him, it's not going to be a great season. He went 16 for 33, 206 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, got benched in the third, and then came back in the fourth. It was a very, very gross game from Alan Bowman, and I think it's one of those things that every single Big 12 team just saw the approach. You know, stop Ollie Gordon, make them throw the ball, and then take advantage of your opportunities. And then finally, Utah was able to run the ball to victory. This is something that they did incredibly well in the Pac-12, and were able to do it in the first game in the Big 12. 25 carries, 182 yards from Micah Bernard. Might have been the most impressive player on the field this Saturday, and then found themselves up 22-3, and then just held the line. You know, Oklahoma State did have 2 scoring possessions of 58 and 69 yards to finish it, but they were held under 200 total yards before that pretty handily. It was really incredible what Utah was able to do, and I think it set them up for a reality where they might just run away with this conference with how everything else is going, and we'll talk about some of the other results from around there later in the show. But where do they go from here? I think for Oklahoma State, I refuse to write them off. I have big time worries about this team, but Mike Gundy is one of those guys that just starts playing really good football out of nowhere. It kind of happened last year, honestly. They lost a game to South Alabama, I believe, and then were able to bounce back, make it to the Big 12 title. So I'm not going to count them out. That being said, if they don't have a run game, they have no chance. There's no way that they're going to be able to beat a lot of these Big 12 teams that they need to if they can't get Ollie Gordon going. So whether it's Ollie Gordon or not, maybe there's another running back that is a little bit more healthy, can play those big-time snaps, and maybe you just have to move forward. I don't know. But at the end of the day, you got to find a run game, whether it's Ollie Gordon or someone else. You would assume it would be Ollie Gordon, but who knows? And then they have they have Kansas State this upcoming weekend, and we'll see what happens with that. I think it's one of those games that both those teams have a ton of questions. We'll get to Kansas State here in a little bit, but one of those things definitely will be interesting to watch with the team that has proven a lot of people wrong in the past, but this is definitely a little bit different with absolutely no running game to really speak of as of right now. And then Utah, really awesome team. I mean, we knew that they were going to be a solid team coming in, but winning without your starting quarterback on the road in probably the toughest place that you're playing all season at Oklahoma State, definitely huge. I mean, it's one of those things that proves just how good of a coach Kyle Whittingham is, just how good that defense is, just how mature this team is overall, because there were a lot of things around Cam Rising last week that could have gotten into these guys' heads, and it didn't. It was really, really impressive to watch them go to work, and this looks like a playoff team to me. I think they need Cam Rising to do that, obviously, but it's one of those things that if you can get him back, then you're absolutely rolling. There's still some questions about how early you get him back, at least from my opinion. I think there's a lot of stuff that happened last week that probably wasn't exactly how it was going down behind the scenes. I think he probably wasn't playing for a while, and I'll just leave that at that. We'll see what happens this upcoming week, and hopefully he does come back, because this team definitely needs him if they're going to be really successful this upcoming season. But 2 really fun games in Oklahoma this past weekend. I think Utah got a huge win that probably set them up really, really well for a Big 12 title, and then Tennessee got a huge win, still plenty in front of them. Still got to play Alabama, still got to play UGA, and if they can get one of those wins, then they are very much in the conversation for the SEC title, and then obviously the playoff, and even if they lose both of them, they're very much in the conversation for the playoff. So a huge win for Tennessee, one of those that you might just look back on and say, that's what got them into the playoff. But massive for both those teams, definitely sets them up really well for the rest of the season. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to get into the Big Ten teams. We'll get into Michigan just gutting out a win over USC, and then Illinois being a really, really interesting game in Nebraska over Nebraska 31-24 in overtime. But we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about those two games over in Oklahoma this past weekend. Tennessee gets a big time win, as well as Utah introduces their new teams to their new conferences with a little bit of an aggressive win for sure, but huge wins for those two teams. And now it's time to talk about the Big Ten. There were a couple of huge games this past weekend. One happened on Friday, and then one was probably the game of the Saturday, honestly. And we'll start with that one. Michigan gets a big-time win over USC at home, and this one was a battle. It was truly maybe the best game of the entire weekend, all back and forth, really, really incredible fight, and this was one that really, I didn't walk out feeling worse about USC. I didn't walk out feeling all that much better about Michigan. I just walked out knowing exactly what these two teams are. I think USC has made huge strides on the defensive side of the ball and have become a much, much better team in terms of tackling, in terms of just being smart on that defensive side of the ball. They just ran up against a team that is going to impose their will. That's what they're going to do, and it's going to be really tough for pretty much any team in the country, especially one that's still trying to turn around everything over there to keep up. So, not necessarily that I came away feeling terrible about USC or thinking they've reverted back to normal. I still think they've made big-time strides, but when you play Michigan, you got to make big strides, and it's got to be a Texas-level type team that is going to be able to handle that physicality, and USC is just not quite there yet. And then I think the other part of this is Miller Moss was awesome. I think there was a number of times where he didn't necessarily play his best football, but he got pressured by, I think, 24 times in this game and threw the ball all over the field in the second half. Was really incredible at bouncing back, making all the plays that he needed to. And I think, although the completion percentage wasn't incredible, although there wasn't necessarily any gaudy numbers from the kid, he made a number of plays that I think are really, really tough. And one of those things that I think just elevates USC that little bit more, that they had that quarterback that is going to be able to bounce back and make those big-time plays down the stretch, and obviously having a defense that's going to give the ball back to you helps that a ton. And then I think Michigan needed this one as bad as anyone in the country. They obviously are coming off that Texas game that was really them trying to do a little bit of Michigan football and kind of getting stifled. The Texas offensive line was dominant during that game. The Texas defensive line did plenty against that O-line. There was a lot of things that Michigan just weren't able to do in that Texas game that they were able to do in this one. They were really, really aggressive, did exactly what they wanted to do, and it's one of those things that they did exactly what they should have been doing from the beginning of the season, which is played Michigan football. That was the biggest thing in this game. 46 carries, 290 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground. Really only broke 3 big tackles, but you'd be surprised how much it matters running those 3 plays down the middle, getting 3-4 yards, and just battering these linebackers. I think it made life really, really tough for them. And then when you needed that one big play, Khalil Mullings just ran through people for about 63 yards. So it's one of those things that Michigan needed to be doing this all year. Frankly, I'm shocked that Davis Warren came out of the gate as the starter. I really want to see what they saw in practice, because this was never going to be a prolific throwing team. I understand you wanted to open that part of your offense, but you were never going to be one of the elite teams throwing the ball. Just lean into who you are. And now that's what they're doing, and it really worked out for them on Saturday, because while USC played really good football for about 58 minutes, there were a couple of moments that Michigan, it's all you need, really. If you have those couple of moments that you can make big-time plays, you're going to be able to win a lot of games, and that's exactly what happened on Saturday. And then those 4 big plays were the big-time run for Khalil Mullings for 53-yard touchdown, Donovan Edwards 41-yard touchdown, another big-time play, and then Will Johnson got a big-time pick that frankly, I think is a little bit more on Zachariah Branch than it was on Miller Moss, but that's a conversation for another day. And then you had the final drive. You had Khalil Mullings on that final drive, and that's all you really needed. You didn't necessarily need a ton. This defense played really good football throughout the day, and especially this D-line, which we'll talk about here in a second. But overall, this is what Michigan needs to do the rest of the season. Hit those couple of big plays, play really aggressive, complete defense, and walk out with a win more times than not. Really impressive performance, and that D-line really set the tone. 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss on 55 dropbacks for Miller Moss. He was pressured 24 times. Josiah Stewart was incredible. Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham played their best game of the year by a mile. It was really impressive to watch this D-line, and frankly, a little bit had to do with that USC offensive line that was not playing good football on Saturday by any means, but it's definitely one of those things that when you have to deal with Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham on the other side, it's going to be a long day. Unless you have an elite offensive line like Texas, like UGA, like these elite teams, it's going to be a long day. So where do they go from here? I think for USC, they didn't lose any juice in my mind. I understand this is a tough loss, and you definitely did not want to take it at this point, but the reality is your defense has come an incredibly long way. You have a tough quarterback that is going to make all the plays down the stretch that you need him to make. You're much better at the point of attack on the defensive side of the ball, stopping the run. I mean, did a really good job for most of this game, stopping a very potent Michigan attack on the ground. So I wouldn't necessarily say I'm out on USC or I feel any worse about USC. They are a very tough team that played really good football for the vast majority of that game, just missed a couple of moments. So it's not necessarily anything against USC. I think it's just you're very far along for where you want to be. You played much better defense. Your offensive line is a little bit better than it was a year ago. All this stuff is slowly coming together. When you play Michigan, a lot of that stuff is going to get exposed. That's just the reality of the situation. And frankly, I think USC can still move forward, have a really great season, have Wisconsin this weekend, and then a battle with Penn State after a game against Minnesota. So plenty still ahead of this team. I think it's one of those things that it's easy to come out of this game and say this team is still soft, this team still can't handle physicality, but this is Michigan. They're a totally different level of physicality, and I think USC is plenty far along for where they want to be right now. And then for Michigan, I think they found their offense. I don't think it's a necessarily too pretty of an offense. I think it's very, very, it's going to be run heavy. It's going to be one of those things that if you can stop the run, you're going to have a lot of success against this team, but it doesn't change that's the only way forward. You're going to have to be physical at the point of attack. Alex Orji is going to have to be the guy that just takes care of the ball and makes the plays that he needs to, and he did a great job of that on Saturday. I think this defense is exactly what we thought they were going to be. Texas made that look way too easy in week 2, and some of that was likely because of the alignment things that have slowly been started to figure out over there at Michigan, but it goes to show you just how good Texas is in the grand scheme of things. But overall, I think it's one of those teams where Michigan's now off to the races. I think a lot of people coming out of this game, if they were to come on the wrong side of it, they definitely would be counting this team out. They would say, this team is over, go ahead and call it. They're not going to make a run in this season. But now you got a couple of games coming up. You got Illinois, which is going to be tough. Definitely have to make sure you take care of that one. Oregon and Ohio State. Say you go 2-1 in those games. Say you even go 1-2, and you're a 9-3 team that's played really tough football. There's a reality where there's some teams out there that are 10-2 that would not get the nod over that 9-3 Michigan because of some of the teams they've lost to. I mean, if they have losses to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State, kind of hard to argue that this is one of the elite teams in the country. So we'll see what happens with them. Absolutely massive win and gives them a shot at the playoff at the very least. And then you got that Illinois-Nebraska game that was absolutely insane. Went to overtime. Nebraska comes out on the wrong side, and frankly, this felt a lot like one of those Nebraska games. It felt like a lot like one of those games that Nebraska usually wins and was not able to. And then on the other side, you had Luke Altmaier just doing ridiculous things with the football. He was so efficient, so confident, and it's one of the things that we'll talk about here in a second, but he was incredible. He was one of those guys that Illinois has needed for quite some time, and they finally have a guy that's just going to execute the thing in front of him, and has done just an incredible job thus far doing that. And then you have a couple of things that it's got to feel like deja vu for Nebraska. They missed a couple of big plays, including that throw to Lindenmeyer. And frankly, I'm not taking anything away from Dylan Raiola. I thought he was incredible in this game, but you miss that one big time chance. You miss you miss that field goal to possibly go up late in the game, and you have a couple of penalties that get in your way. So there were a number of things that felt a lot like old Nebraska. I think they're a little bit far from that. Honestly, I think there's a number of things that are getting a little bit blown out of proportion because it's Nebraska, but there's definitely some things to worry about. There's no two ways about that. And then you got Dylan Raiola. I thought he was incredible. I thought he played every single snap the exact way that you would want him to. He is a freshman. He is going to struggle at certain moments. He's going to miss some of those big-time plays that you kind of need down the stretch of these games. The thing is, you have a star. You have a kid that is handling these moments way better than he probably should as a freshman, that's going through reads really impressively, that's putting balls exactly where they need to be, and he's one of those guys that maybe it's not this year. Maybe everything doesn't come together, and I know Nebraska fans badly wanted the CFP berth this year, badly wanted to compete in the Big Ten. Maybe you don't. You're coming off a 5-win season. Maybe you don't compete in the Big Ten this year. Maybe you don't get to the playoff. You still have the quarterback that's going to give you a shot down the road. You still have a quarterback that when you show up in fall next year in 2025, you're going to say we have every shot to do everything we want to do because that guy's in our jersey. So he was really impressive. I thought it was one of those games that you could have said, that last throw is obviously a huge one and maybe that ruins the entire performance for you, but he was really incredible before that. And I think one of those mistakes is not going to make the kid, and I think he did plenty in this game for them to possibly win it. They just came out on the wrong side. And then you have how Illinois was able to win, really just playing clean football against not so clean football. Illinois did not necessarily have to do anything overly incredible, but they only had 20 penalty yards compared to 89 for Nebraska. Nebraska had 50 yards on 32 carries. There was no real juice from this Nebraska team. There were a number of places where they just missed opportunities altogether. So Illinois was kind of just having to keep in the game, stay around, make sure that you give yourselves a shot, and then make the plays down the stretch, and they really did. And Nebraska fans have to hate this feeling. This feels like a little bit like the old Nebraska. I think they'll be fine down the stretch, but it was a little bit eerie on Friday night. I'll just leave it at that. And then Nebraska missed some chances. There's no two ways about that. Illinois fumbles with 8 minutes left. Nebraska comes down. Dylan Raiola misses that big play in the touchdown, and then they miss the field goal and end up losing it. So it's one of those things that Nebraska left a lot on the table. There's no two ways about that. Illinois took full advantage of those misses, but the reality is when Nebraska was able to win that game, they couldn't put it away, and they very much need to be able to do that going forward, or there's going to be a lot of the same things over in Lincoln that we've been dealing with for quite some time. And then Luke Altmaier was awesome. 21 for 27, 215 yards, 4 touchdowns, just as efficient as can be. And he has 2 guys on the outside, in Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin, that are really one of the more underrated duos in the entire country. Just really, really good players, and 2 guys that can make all the difference in the Big Ten race, and they have plenty in front of them. Going to be really, really fun to watch this group go to work. As for where they go from now, I think Nebraska is a very tough loss. There's no two ways about that. But I do think there is a world where you're able to look at the positive here. You have taken steps forward. It is not near the same team that it was a year ago in terms of just not playing all that complete offense, giving the ball away a number of times. This would have been a really gross game a year ago. Illinois probably would have won by 21, 24 points, and it would have been 3 turnovers from Nebraska. It would have been a lot of mistakes, and it would have been so many different things that you have to fix and you probably can't fix in this year. The thing is, Dylan Raiola was incredible. You have the guy at quarterback. You know that you have the guy in. You know he's not going to make too many bad decisions. Now, he did have one INT on a just ridiculous play from the Illinois kid, but overall, I think it's one of those things that there's plenty of things to be upset about. There's no two ways about that. Nebraska was definitely building towards a remarkable season, and I still think they can have a remarkable season. The thing is, you probably weren't going to make it to the CFP. With a freshman starting at quarterback, there was going to be some of these moments, and that's just the reality of the situation. No reason to believe that you still can't improve and you still can't walk into 2025 with those aspirations and feel good about them. But as of right now, I think you're just a little bit away, and that's okay. You're just kind of biding time a little bit until you can really get rolling in 2025. At least that's the way that I see it. And then Illinois. This team just went on 9-win, 10-win watch. This is a really impressive team. They do go to State College next week, which is going to be tough. And then they have games at Michigan at home and then Oregon. But the reality is this team plays very clean football. They play a level of football that it's going to be really tough to just straight up put away this team. It's going to be really tough to blow them out. It's going to be really tough to keep them totally out of the game. So really impressive stuff from Brett Bielema. I think he's made a number of big-time changes around there, particularly going to get Luke Altmaier and kind of developing him in this system. But this is a good team. This is a team that's going to make all types of noise in the Big Ten. And I think they're one of those teams that maybe you look up in the middle of that Michigan game and they're winning at halftime, and then we're talking about them in the playoff. I know that sounds a little bit crazy right now, but Illinois is playing really clean football and one of those teams that is just going to be a really tough out throughout the entirety of the Big Ten schedule. So a couple of really incredible games to get the Big Ten play started over there, but Michigan and Illinois get big-time wins. USC and Nebraska take little steps back, but I don't think necessarily the sky is falling like some people are suggesting around those two programs. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to get through these upset alerts because there were a number of games that went down to the wire or came out on the other side of really impressive upsets this past weekend, and we got to get to them all because there are a ton to get to right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about those two Big Ten matchups. Michigan and Illinois get big-time wins to start their Big Ten play, and it's going to be really fun to watch those teams going forward. I think they're both teams that are likely still on the outside looking into the playoff, but that could change on one Saturday when they play each other, actually. So will definitely be interesting to watch those teams, but let's get into all the upsets that happened this past weekend because there were plenty of them, and we have to jump in really quick here because there's so much to get to. And we'll start with that Missouri-Vanderbilt game. Missouri does get the win in overtime 30-27 on a missed field goal from Vanderbilt. This Missouri team just keeps getting away with wins, but they are cutting it way too close. They're one of those teams that, this is Vanderbilt. You're going to have to play a number of teams coming forward. You have to go to South Carolina. You have to play an Arkansas team that is going to be tough. You have to play, obviously, an Alabama team, and then Oklahoma at the end of the season. There are too many games to be playing this level of football for Missouri. If they want to make the playoff, if they want to make the SEC title and do all the things that they're more than capable of doing, they have to play better football than this. There are so many things that have to be cleaned up, and I think this schedule sets up nicely. Obviously, if you've heard anything about Missouri, it's that schedule is, I don't want to say easy, but on the easier side of things in the SEC, and if they can get that Alabama win, then they're really off to the races. Now, I do think that if they play that level of football, there's not going to be much of a conversation to be had. I think there's going to be enough places where they can get tripped up that it's going to be a tough season for them. That being said, there's a number of things that can just be tweaked a little bit, and this team can definitely hit the race. It just feels like they're not quite as scary as they could be offensively. Feels like that defense, the hits that they took this past offseason are starting to show themselves a little bit more now, and Diego Pavia are going to be a problem. And Vanderbilt, Diego Pavia and Vanderbilt are going to be an absolute problem for pretty much every team in the SEC. There's not going to be a weekend where you don't look up and Vandy's not giving someone just a little bit of a fit. And it's not necessarily that I think they're going to win a big-time game this year. Maybe they will. I think there's a number of places for them to possibly spoil a big-time team's season, but I think it's one of those teams that every team is going to have to come on their P's and Q's. They're going to have to make sure that they're ready to roll in that game because if you're not, Vanderbilt's going to take full advantage and force you to overtime like they did with Missouri. So Missouri has stuff to figure out, no two ways about that. I think it's possible that even a 10-2 season doesn't quite get them into the dance because of that schedule, although I'm not overly worried about that. I think you're 10-2 in the SEC, that probably gets you in, but it's definitely one of those things to watch. I was a little bit worried about Missouri's defense coming into this season. I'm a little bit more worried about their offense going forward, and I don't really know why that's the case. They have so many different game changers on that offense, especially at the wide receiver position, but they haven't been able to get really anything going. They've gotten a couple of moments here and there, but consistent offense that is supposed to be as dangerous as this offense is, not quite hitting that mark, at least as of yet. I think they still have plenty of ways to grow and are going to be a dangerous team this upcoming year, but as of right now, they're not necessarily playing the elite football they need to play to get into the playoff the way they want to. And then we had another ranked team that really struggled this past weekend. Northern Illinois goes down in overtime to Buffalo. The Cinderella story comes to an end for the Huskies. Hate to see him go, but it was a very fun little couple of weeks there. Really great job from Buffalo, and especially Pete Lembo, who came over for Maurice Lindquist when he took that job down at Bama. Did an incredible job with this team. They play really clean football. They stay in these games much longer than they did a year ago. They were down 14-3 in this game. Were able to battle back to come back and win. So really impressive stuff from this team. I think they're one of those guys that probably won't make too much noise in the MAC, but might be able to knock off a couple of those big-time teams and definitely shake up that conference a little bit. And I think more than anything, I think Northern Illinois just got in a tough spot more than anything else. I think huge win, tons of media coverage. Frankly, I think the bye might have actually hurt them for refocusing because they knew they had all this time that I don't know if they really refocused until this upcoming week, and that's probably a little bit too late for this game. So they just missed the mark on this one. I think it's one of those things that you'll probably see this a lot in the MAC, where you feel really good about one team, and then they walk into a stadium on one given Saturday, and it doesn't go their way, because the MAC is really weird. So this is a huge start to the season, I think, for Buffalo. Makes them a little bit more interesting in that MAC race. For Northern Illinois, I think they're very much in the race, but definitely a huge blow to them for sure. And then we had this one. I don't even know what happened in this game. I watched the entire thing, and I still don't know what happened in this game. James Madison scored 53 points in the first half, only scored 17 in the second half, and won by 20 points. It was just absolutely ridiculous stuff from North Carolina in this game. They just got dominated. It was absolutely insane. It was one of those things where if you had flipped the jerseys, or if you had no jerseys on at all, you would think one team was Power 5 and one team was Group of 5. You would flip those teams. I can absolutely promise you that, particularly that quarterback, Alonzo Barnett III, really incredible stuff. And Bob Chesney does really, really good stuff over there at James Madison in short time, coming over from Holy Cross. And it was a lot of things to figure out over there at James Madison. A lot of stuff walking out the door, a lot of players walking out the door, and he was able to figure it out. Really, really incredible stuff. And Alonzo Barnett was incredible in this game. 22 for 34, 487 total yards, 7 total touchdowns. He was all over the place. He was absolutely incredible, and it was a clinic against this UNC team that, for whatever reason, just cannot figure it out. There's some talks around Mac Brown possibly retiring. Obviously, we will touch on that if that does become reality. I think it might just become reality, but we'll see what happens. Definitely a huge win for JMU. Sets their sights on the Sun Belt title, and it could be really fun. If it's them against Texas State at the end of the season, that might just be appointment television, I'll be totally honest. And then we had Navy just do mean things to Memphis as well. And this was a very, very tough spot for Memphis, coming off that huge win against FSU a week ago. They didn't even play that great of football a week ago. I'll be totally honest. They won that game at FSU, and absolutely huge for them, no doubt about that. But the reality is they did not play all that clean, and it really showed itself on Saturday because Blake Horvath ran absolutely crazy on this team. Went 9 for 12 passing the ball, but had 192 passing yards, had 211 on the ground, had 6 total scores, 4 on the ground, 2 through the air. The kid was incredible. He was absolutely awesome, and one of those things where you look up probably every 5 minutes and you'd see him running free for another touchdown. It was incredible to watch them go to work, and Memphis just got a huge shot to their CFP hopes. That is for sure. It's one of those things that a lot of people thought they would just kind of roll through the American, be able to be at the end of the year with Tulane or with one of these other elite teams in there playing for a spot in the playoff. Now it just got a lot more sketchy, and frankly, I think they might have had to go undefeated to get it. Possibly if they go 12-1, they're able to pull it off, but this is a really tough loss, and they're going to have to make sure that Navy's one of those teams that competes in the AAC, and frankly, I think they might just be able to. They did so many great things. I think that offense is very, very dangerous, what they call the sling T over there. Really, really dangerous offense, and whenever you give up 400 yards of offense to one player, never the greatest thing for a Memphis team that very badly needs a good defense if they're going to make it through that American schedule. So definitely a little bit worried about Memphis. I think their CFP hopes might be dwindling by the second, and then Navy is one of those teams that you're going to want to watch going forward because they play some really fun football over there in Annapolis. And then Washington State escaped. They stayed alive for their CFP hopes, possibly their CFP hopes. This is definitely a game that will come up in those conversations, I can promise you that. But first of all, very much apologize to the guy that asked for John Mateer over 250 passing yards. He had 390. I just did not think that was going to be the case. San Jose State came in with a top 20 passing offense or passing defense. I thought they would be able to do a little bit better, but John Mateer was absolutely incredible. Emmett Brown was incredible on the other side, who actually was a Washington State quarterback last year. That quarterback room in general was crazy. Emmett Brown, Cam Ward, as well as John Mateer in that Washington State room a year ago, but now they've kind of spread out all over the place, and it was a really, really awesome game. It was one of those games, probably the game of the week, maybe the game of the year thus far. It was really incredible game, back and forth, and one of those that you just needed the guy to make those couple of plays, and that was John Mateer. He 26 for 46, not necessarily incredible day passing the ball, but 501 total yards, 6 touchdowns. Definitely does the trick. There's no doubt about that. He was incredible in this game, and their CFP hopes stay alive just for a little bit longer. This is one of those teams that I've kind of fallen in love with throughout this season. They're so much fun to watch. John Mateer is absolutely appointment television, so if you haven't watched him yet, go ahead and do yourself a favor and go watch him, but he's really incredible, and this team is getting more and more interesting by the week. They keep winning these games, and if they go undefeated, there's no way you're keeping them out. I can almost promise you that. So a ton of big-time games coming up at Fresno State, at Boise State, so we'll see what happens with this team, but they stay alive for at least one more day, and John Mateer does plenty to keep that a reality. And then A&M escaped. This is a Bowling Green team that is really good, frankly. I'm not even going to talk down on A&M too much in this game because this is a good Bowling Green team. This is a team that I fully expect to be very much in the mix for the MAC, and I might just pick them right now if I was picking the MAC championship. So a really impressive team pushed Penn State to the limit and then came over to A&M and did the exact same thing. And the guy at the center of it is Harold Fannin Jr. This kid is incredible. This is a kid that not only do you have to watch the rest of the season, you're going to be seeing him on Sundays. He's really, really an impressive player, and frankly, I knew the name. I was not watching him nearly enough. He had 8 catches, 145 yards, a touchdown in this game, and looked like he should be on the A&M roster. And frankly, I bet A&M probably wants him on that roster right about now. He is really incredible, and one of those things that I think when you look up at the end of the season, he could be a guy that might have the numbers for a John Mackey type award season. He was really, really awesome, and one of those guys that I know he's Group of 5. I know he probably won't get the Mackey award. He probably should get a little bit of recognition for it. He's absolutely incredible. And then on the other side, A&M is one of those teams that's just going to need a little bit of time. I think they're more than a quarterback away. I think they have a number of things that they have to fix, particularly on that offensive line. The defense plays really well. I think they're a really solid defense. They got beat a couple of times on some trick plays and some different things, but overall, I think a really solid defense, one of those teams that's going to be frisky throughout the season, but I think 2025 is likely when everything takes off for that Mike Elko team over there, but overall, you got the win, right? You kept your hopes alive and definitely stayed in the fight. And this will be an interesting team going forward. We'll see what they can do with Marcel Reed at quarterback, but not necessarily the result you wanted. If you're an A&M fan, I think you had a lot of momentum coming out of last week and definitely lost a little bit. There's no two ways about that, but still plenty in front of you, no doubt. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're just going to get to the rest of the top 25, break down what everyone did, and we'll break down an Archie Manning performance that was a C+, as he put it, and I tend to agree with him. But we'll talk about that right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about all of the upsets from this past weekend, and it might have just been who am I thinking of? Navy that probably had the biggest win on knocking off Memphis, but then you had JMU just do mean things to UNC pretty much all Saturday, so an incredible weekend for those upsets and very, very close calls other places. But let's get into the rest of the top 25. There are a number of teams that had some shaky performances, some that lost, some that played really well and proved to me that they're title contenders this year, but let's get into this, and we'll start with the top team in the land, and we'll start with the quarterback that everyone was talking about going into this weekend. Texas gets a big-time win over, or not even a big-time win, but a big win over ULM, 51-3. Archie Manning was up and down, no two ways about that. In his first start, he went 15 for 29, 258 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions. So very much an up and down day from the kid. I think it proved to a lot of people that Arch Manning does a lot of really, really great things. If this Texas team wants to win a title, Quinn Ewers has to be back there at quarterback. There are a couple of little things that are more nuanced and tougher to pick up on if you're not playing, so nothing against Arch by any means, but I do think there are certain things that you're just going to need Quinn Ewers in there if you're going to be able to do the things you want to do this upcoming year. But on the other side, Jaden Blue picked up the slack more than enough. 25 carries, 124 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground, and then added the receiving touchdown as well. He was absolutely incredible, and it's what Texas fans have kind of been waiting to see from this running back one for this year. If he can get it rolling, then this is a downright terrifying offense. That's already pretty terrifying, but you add that running game and a very dangerous runner, things get really interesting. And Texas continues to roll. Mississippi State this weekend, it sounds like Quinn Ewers will be back for that game, but we'll obviously keep you updated throughout the week. Frankly, I think they might be able to win it with Arch Manning at quarterback because they're favored by I think about 38 points right about now, so absolutely insane, but huge for Texas, and they keep things rolling the way that they very much want to this year. And then you had Miami. I thought this was one of the more impressive performances of the entire weekend because it felt like early on in that game it might just be one of those Mario Cristobal Miami type performances. They were letting USF hang around just a little bit too much, and it was one of those things where you felt like a mistake might happen at some point, and this game becomes very real very quickly. Miami just absolutely stepped on their throat. After about, I think, the 2-minute mark in the second quarter, they just went to work. And Cam Ward was absolutely incredible. 24 for 34, 404 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He did exactly what you wanted him to do and stayed right in that Heisman level conversation. No two ways about that. He's really incredible and one of those guys that just continues to play elite football every single weekend. And you keep waiting for the other shoe to drop because he's kind of been that up and down guy throughout his career. It hasn't yet, so I'm not necessarily super worried about him going forward. I thought it was really, really incredible what USF was able to do early in this game, but also what Miami was able to do in the second half. I think it really proved what Miami is, which is a real title contender. This is a team that is able to, make the adjustments they need to make at halftime and come forward and play really good defense pretty much throughout this day. And then when you have someone like Cam Ward at quarterback, you're going to be able to do a lot of stuff on offense. So I think this is one of those teams that really proved a lot, although, they're playing a team that is a group of 5 team. This is a really solid USF team. We saw it against Alabama. We saw it for much of this game, at least. And I think they're one of those teams that if you can beat them by 35 points, you're doing something right. I can promise you that. And then you had this game. Kansas State loses 9-38 against BYU in Provo. And it's one of those things that going up to Provo at night is a dangerous thing. There's no two ways about that. And I think Kansas State just got jumped from the get-go. I think Kansas State really got taken to the woodshed in this game, and Avery Johnson made a number of mistakes. He went 15 for 28, 130 yards, 2 interceptions, had a fumble by DJ Giddens, and a lot of things went wrong. They also had a 93-yard punt return given up. It was all over the place for Kansas State, and there was really no let-up from BYU, which brings me to them. I think they're a player in the Big 12. The Big 12 has kind of been flipped on its head since the start of the season, with Kansas not playing well, West Virginia not playing great, all of these teams just being a little bit all over the place. BYU's 4-0. They're 1-0 in conference. They have a schedule that is relatively manageable. They're at Baylor next week, so we'll see what happens there, and then they have a bye week, but this is a team that's really dangerous, and Jake Retzlaff is making every single play in front of him. 15 for 21, 149 yards, 2 touchdowns in this game. He did exactly what you wanted to do, and is definitely one of those quarterbacks that, especially in the Big 12, that is a little bit all over the place, that has so many variables every single week. Having a quarterback that's just going to execute the game plan in front of him can do you a lot of good. So I think BYU is one of those teams that I wasn't necessarily watching to start the season. I'm definitely watching them now. I can promise you that. This LSU game was really interesting, and you did have one really bad piece of news come out. It sounds like Harold Perkins will be out for the rest of the season with a torn ACL. That's a really, really tough life for Blake Baker calling this defense, because that is a huge piece in his defensive scheme. I think it's one of those things that maybe Harold Perkins doesn't make all the plays in the world. He is so important for the guys that do. He is so important to take up all that attention, to take up that extra pass blocker, and then Braden Swinson, who's been incredible this year, is able to kind of eat the way that he has. Had 2 sacks this game, had 3 against South Carolina. He was all over the place. And then J.K. Johnson, in the back end of that defense, played really, really good football throughout this one. So it feels like that defense is making way. They started this game a little bit tough, but were able to kind of tighten the screws and make big-time plays. It feels like they're kind of making progress the way that a lot of us expected, right? It wasn't going to be perfect from the get-go. Blake Baker has a very aggressive system that you need guys on the back end that are going to be able to play that man defense in. It sounds like J.K. Johnson is really stepping up. I think P.J. Woodland's one of those guys that is probably going to take a little bit more time, but will be very talented towards the end of the year. Ashton Stamp's the exact same way. So I think they're doing enough. And then when you have Garrett Nussmeier on the other side, 32 for 44, 350 yards, 3 touchdowns in this game, you're going to be more than fine. That's one of the best pure throwers of the football in the country, and one of those guys that every time he steps on the field, I get more impressed about what he is. But overall, you need that huge win somewhere. You got this one. You took care of business, kept moving forward. You got to get Ole Miss or Alabama. That's where the season really is decided for this team. They do play South Alabama this upcoming week, so definitely one to watch. Kind of a shootout alert there, but Ole Miss coming after a bye on October 12th, and it's one of those games that if they can get that one, the entire season changes in a hurry for LSU, and I think they're one of those teams that we've kind of written off after that Week 1 performance, but maybe they can make something happen towards the end of this year and get that defense figured out slowly but surely. Notre Dame is Notre Dame at this point. They're one of those teams that, I don't want to put it this way because it's a little bit aggressive, but they can throw the ball better than Michigan. They're also going to have to win games the exact same way Michigan does. They're going to have to run the ball. They're going to have to play defense. They're going to have to do all of those things if they're going to want to beat the elite teams on their schedule. Now, they don't have nearly as many elite teams on their schedule as normal teams do, but I do think they're one of those teams that is just going to have to win games a certain type of way. It doesn't mean they can't win games that way because this defense is absolutely incredible, and Riley Leonard is making plenty of plays, both throwing the ball, or in this game at least, and running the ball, especially with 12 carries, 143 yards, and a touchdown. He did plenty in this game, no two ways about that, but it feels like that's the only thing that Notre Dame has going right now. If it's not Jeremiah Love, if it's not Riley Leonard running the ball, it's not going to be a lot on this team. So they have a ton of stuff to figure out. Respect to Miami of Ohio for scheduling 3 Power 4 teams to start their season, because they started 0-3, but I still think they're a dangerous team in the MAC. Still one of those teams that's definitely going to be really fun to watch, but Notre Dame, I really haven't changed my opinion too much. I think they're the exact same team that I thought they were in Week 1, and it's not necessarily a great one, at least in terms of playing those elite teams down the road like Louisville, like all of those teams. And let's talk about Louisville. They got a big-time win over Georgia Tech this past weekend, and this was kind of a funny game. It was one of those games that Georgia Tech hung around for quite some time, and then a blocked kick totally changed this game. Louisville returns it for a touchdown, and frankly, I think if you're Georgia Tech, you probably want to punt the ball there, but it's kind of splitting hairs. Definitely an interesting decision, and one of those that really hurt them at the end of the day. But this is a really explosive Louisville team. They made a number of plays down the field. Ja'Cory Brooks made one of the most ridiculous plays of the entire Saturday on a touchdown. And then Chris Bell is one of those guys that get the ball in his hands and he's going to go. He's really, really incredible, and they did a lot of really good things. I think they still have some things to figure out. No two ways about that. I think this was not necessarily the full, complete performance that they would love to have going forward and probably need to have going forward, but you got the win, and it's a huge one at that. Georgia Tech only had 98 yards on 37 carries in this game, so if you're going to beat Georgia Tech, if you can stop that run, then you have a huge, huge advantage in that game. So Louisville's very much in that ACC race. They are probably the third team as I see it right now, with the team I'm about to talk about playing really good football this past weekend, but this is a really dangerous team, again, for Jeff Brom, one of those teams that I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them at Charlotte at the end of the year. They do have some things to figure out, but a very, very fun team, and one that could make all types of noise in the ACC yet again this year. And then we have the team that made probably the biggest statement of the weekend, at least in the ACC, and that was Clemson just dominating NC State. Frankly, this one, even though it's won by 24 points by Clemson, it looks better than it was. NC State scored 21 points in the fourth quarter to Clemson 0 because they took their foot way off the gas pedal. But Cade Klubnik was incredible in this game. Had a huge touchdown run that you're seeing right there to start the game, and then was just crisp. It looks like he's having so much fun playing football for the first time really since he's been at Clemson, and he's doing an incredible job executing this offense. I think NC State has a number of issues on the back end of that defense and has a number of issues on that defense in general, but frankly, I thought this was more about Clemson than it was about NC State. I thought they were so incredible executing this offense, and this is a dangerous team. One of those things that you might just have to throw out that UGA performance and take this team for what they are going forward, because it's a really interesting one and one that could make all types of noise this year. But I made a prediction early on, or I believe late last week, where I was talking about I think it's going to be a 2-horse race in the ACC. Not necessarily exactly a 2-horse race. I do think Miami and Clemson are setting the pace right now. Miami a little bit more so than Clemson, but Clemson's really picking up some slack right about now, and one of those teams that I would not be surprised at all if they ran the table the rest of the way, and we're sitting there waiting for Miami at the end of the road. But really, really fun games. One of those weekends that you saw plenty of stuff. There's no two ways about that, and we got plenty more for you in the next segment. We're going to get to all of the other games that definitely popped out on the page. You had Rutgers get a big-time win at Virginia Tech. You had Florida and Mississippi State play one of the ugliest games of football I've seen in quite some time, at least on the Mississippi State side. But we'll get to that right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the other top 25 teams, just got into all of the results there. Clemson with one of the most impressive performances of the entire weekend, just dominating NC State this past weekend. But let's get into all of the other games. There were a number of big-time performances this past weekend, and we'll get to that Colorado one towards the end. But let's get into, to start, this Florida-Mississippi State game. This was a very interesting game, and it showed exactly why Mississippi State is one of those teams that you have Texas favored by 38 points against, because Florida looked incredible, at least on the offensive side of the ball. Graham Mertz went 19 for 21, 201 yards, 3 touchdowns in this game. He was perfect. And then DJ Lagway went 7 for 7, 79 yards. So everything went about as well as you could possibly hope from the Florida side of things, and that's exactly what you need right now. Billy Napier is going to be your coach for at least a little bit longer, I think maybe throughout the rest of the year, and you might just have to settle in with this one. So getting this performance is absolutely huge. Mississippi State did lose Blake Shapen for the year in this game, and a huge loss for that team. Definitely a quarterback that has the ability to run this offense at a very high level, just hasn't quite hit that stride yet. Michael Van Buren is going to take over for that team, and he's got to go to Texas for his very first start. So not necessarily the greatest start for the kid. We'll see what he can do, but it's one of those things that Mississippi State is just so far from where you need to be right now. I think it'll take time over there. I think Jeff Lebby has a really solid plan and one of those teams that is going to be dangerous coming forward, but they're very far from where they need to be right now, and I would not be surprised if they were sitting at the very bottom of the SEC at the end of the year. And then you had a Stanford team that made some very interesting things happen at Syracuse, and this is becoming one of those more interesting teams of the entire year. I think when Stanford's on the screen, you might just want to tune in because Ashton Daniels does some ridiculous things with the football, and some of them are great, some of them are not so great, and that's the great thing about football. But both these quarterbacks had 2 picks. They were kind of up and down. This one came down to the wire, and finally Stanford made the big-time plays. 11 plays, 54-yard drive to get the game-winning field goal, and the focus is going to be on Kyle McCord, and I totally understand that. He made a number of mistakes in this game. The run game for Syracuse just has to be more. They got 17 carries for 28 total yards, 8 carries for LaQuint Allen. You have to get him the ball more. You have to be able to run the ball more effectively if you want to be able to get Kyle McCord the openings on the back end to pass the ball. So I understand that Kyle McCord took a step back on Friday, and it's not necessarily to say that he's going to be an absolute world beater going forward, but they got to find that running game. If they can, I think this offense can still be very dangerous for Syracuse. As for Stanford, they're a very interesting team. They're one of those teams that no matter who they line up in front of on any given Saturday, they can make something happen because of what Ashton Daniels can do with the football. I think it's one of those teams that maybe it's not the prettiest football in the world, but definitely worth your time. A really, really fun Stanford team, and I think maybe in time they could be a player in the ACC. Not this year, but maybe in 2025, 26, they can make something happen. This was a weird game because it went down to a weird delay for about 2.5 hours, a lightning delay that kept these two teams off the field, but West Virginia was able to figure it out. Won this one 32-28, and Garrett Green is a really tough dude. And I knew that coming into this game, no doubt about that, but he struggled early in this one and responded. In the final 15 minutes of the game, made multiple plays down the stretch, had 295 through the air, 2 scores, 87 on the ground, 1 score. He was a leading rusher for this West Virginia team. He did everything that they needed him to do, and especially down the stretch of this game, made a number of plays that show exactly the player that he is and why he's one of my players in the entire country. Really, really impressive kid, and one of those guys that just does not take no for an answer in a lot of different respects. So really, really like him, and Kansas has just missed the mark this year. Frankly, the run game is still elite, and they're going to do exactly what they need to do. And frankly, I think they're going to beat a number of teams in the Big 12 race. They wanted to compete for the conference. They wanted to possibly get to the CFP and not be on the outside looking in. Right now, you're 1-3. The only win you have is against Lindenwood to start the season. Not a lot of things are going great for Kansas. And their quarterback, Jalen Daniels, is not quite the player that he was under Andy Kotelnicki. So a lot of things go in the wrong direction for Kansas right now, and we'll see if they can figure out the rest of the season. I still think they're going to be a solid team in the Big 12, but too many things that they need to figure out for them to actually compete this year. And then you got Rutgers, got a huge win this past weekend, and they moved to 4-0. There's a lot of doors opening for Rutgers slowly, week by week. I think they're one of those teams that now you're looking at 9 wins as a real possibility, with 10 wins as a not so crazy possibility at this moment. And if they win another big game down the road, this is a really dangerous team. Kyle Monungai and Samuel Brown were incredible in this game. Really elite running back duo. Ethan Kaliak-Manis is a very, very talented kid. One of those guys that is just kind of avoiding mistakes right now. And when you run the ball the way that they do, you play defense the way that they do, that's going to be plenty. And then on the other side, I think Rutgers kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit in this game. Went up 23-7, and then Virginia Tech started to chip away, and Byshell Tootin was incredible in this game. 15 carries, 122 yards, 3 touchdowns. They got to get more from Kyron Drones. He's making a number of mistakes and keeping this team from winning a number of games that they have every ability to win, including that Vandy game and this game. Just too many mistakes on that side of the ball, and one of those things that you have a very talented veteran team, but you're missing the mark because you're letting teams come back in these games. You're letting teams get those early leads, and then you don't have enough firepower to come back. So, huge win for Rutgers. They are a player in the Big Ten. I don't necessarily think they're going to beat the elite teams out there, but I think they'll beat a lot of teams below them. They have a Nebraska game in a couple of weeks that if they win that one, things get really interesting in this race, and maybe a team that might be able to sneak into the playoff. I know that sounds crazy right now, but this is a really dangerous team that's playing really good football right about now. And then you got Florida State. They finally get their first win of the season, 14-9 over Cal, and this one was gross. Florida State did get the win, don't get me wrong, that is a plus, but man, this one was tough to watch for a number of different reasons. The Florida State defense was incredible, and that's absolutely huge for them going forward, and something that you kind of expected to have from the first game of the season, but they finally come along and have finally played really, really good football. I think this is one of those teams that is probably just going to have to win games like this. They're probably going to have to win games, 14-9 or 10-3 or really, really gross games offensively, but their defense plays elite football, and I think they have every ability to do that. I don't think they're going to beat the elite teams out there like Clemson, Miami, all of those teams that are going to be really tough to fully keep under wraps offensively, but there are plenty of teams out there that they can beat this way. I just don't know how many times they're going to have the ability to play that elite of football on the defensive side of the ball consistently throughout a game. So it's one of those things that Florida State is who they are at this point. I'm not necessarily going to waste too much time acting like they've turned a corner and they're going to change all of a sudden, but definitely one of those that they just needed to see one go through the hoop. They just needed to see one in the win column, and they finally got it. As for Cal, huge missed opportunity here. You could have gone to 4-0. You could have been a team that was 1-0 in conference and has a lot of confidence going forward, kind of like that Boston College team that we'll talk about here in a second, or Syracuse, or one of these teams that is just kind of hanging around. Maybe is not the most elite team in the world, but is doing enough to win these close games and move on to the next week. This is a huge blow, and one of those that I don't necessarily think they're going to be able to bounce back from. I think for Florida State, nothing's really changed. They're the team that they are going forward, and that's just going to be the way it is throughout the rest of the season. But I think there does come a time when why not throw Luke Kromenhoek out there? If you think he's going to be the guy going forward, and maybe he's not, maybe they're going to get a guy out of the portal and they'll kind of, move forward with that. But I do think it's one of those things that you're not getting elite play from the quarterback position anyway. You're probably not going to get it with Luke Kromenhoek, but at least you see what he is. Maybe it's a little bit early in the season to talk about that, but I think it's one of those things that the more that Florida State fans have to watch DJ play quarterback for them, I think they come a little bit closer to possibly playing the freshman. But we'll see what happens there. I think it's one of those things that you probably just want to, if you're winning games, you're not going to make a change, obviously. But I think at a certain point, you just have to start thinking about 2025 over there in Tallahassee. A huge win for Iowa this past weekend, and one that was a little bit sketchy at a certain point in this game. Was 14-14 with Minnesota, but they were able to win this game 31-14, pulled away late, and Caleb Jackson is incredible. He's been probably the second best running back in the entire country behind Ashton Jeanty thus far. 21 carries, 206 yards, 3 touchdowns in this game. This kid was incredible, and I know this Iowa offense is not making big strides in terms of throwing the ball. I think they've opened a ton of running lanes. With Tim Lester at offensive coordinator, with all the motion and different things that they're employing this year, I think they're opening running lanes that they didn't in the past, and Caleb Johnson is really benefiting from that. A very dangerous team, and they got a bye, and then they're at Ohio State. I don't necessarily think they're going to win that game, but outside of that, they're favored in pretty much every one of their games coming forward, and frankly, I think they will be throughout the rest of the season. This is one of those teams that I don't necessarily think they're going to make noise in the Big 12. I don't think they're going to get to the Big 10 championship. There's a lot of games in front of them that they should be able to win following this formula, and if they can, then it gets really interesting in a hurry for Iowa. Cannot wait to see what this team can become, and if Caleb Johnson's running that way, then this is definitely a very interesting team. I can promise you that. And then Boston College got the big-time win in the red bandana game over Michigan State. This one was a little bit gross. It was rainy. It was all over the place. There were a number of mistakes, especially from Aiden Childs with 3 INTs in this game, but Boston College got it done. Thomas Castellanos went 10 for 16, 140 yards, 1 touchdown throwing, so nothing overly special, but frankly, they were going to keep it on the ground a lot in this game, and that's exactly what they did. Were able to get the win, and they continue to impress me. I don't necessarily think they're an elite team that's going to be able to, make the playoff or do anything crazy this year, but they keep making the play in front of them. They keep making the right play and keep not making mistakes that let teams back in these games. It's a huge reason why they beat Florida State. It's a reason why they won this game. And frankly, it's a reason why they're going to be dangerous throughout the rest of the ACC schedule. I think they're so interesting. They're one of those teams that no matter who they're playing, whether it's Clemson or Miami, I don't know how many of these teams they play, but let's just say they play the elite teams in the conference, I don't think they're going to shy away from any challenge, and I don't think they should. They've been really, really impressive thus far, and one of those teams that, if you got Thomas Castellanos, things get very, very interesting in a hurry. And then they have Western Kentucky next week, and then ACC play starts with at Virginia, but this is a really dangerous team, and one that if they get a couple of things, little things fixed in that team, they can make all types of noise in the ACC. And then Michigan State I would strap in for 2025. I think this is going to be an interesting team the rest of the way because of how Aiden Childs plays, but I do think this is one of those teams that is going to be able to get things going. I think that with a one transfer portal class, with one recruiting class in there, things can get more interesting, but right now they're just very far from where they need to be, and they have Ohio State next week, so I don't think it's getting any prettier for the Spartans as of right now. And then we had maybe the game of the weekend, right up there with Washington State, San Jose State, because this game was insane and absolutely incredible finish and ridiculous throw from Shadur Sanders for that touchdown to LeJonte Wester. Insane catch in the rain by LeJonte Wester, and then a remarkable play by Travis Hunter to finish it off. Colorado just keeps responding. I think it's one of those things that last year, I don't think they win this game. I don't think they have the dudes to win this game on the defensive side of the ball, but also I don't think they had the mental toughness to win a game like this a year ago. Now they do, and that's kind of the biggest difference in this team. I still have my worries about them, and I still think they're going to, for the most part, struggle in the Big 12. I still think they'll win a couple of big-time games, but I think there are a number of issues with this team that are going to take a little bit of time to fix. That being said, they've made big-time strides this year. They've done a lot of really big-time things, and one of those things is just letting Shadur Sanders stand upright. It hasn't been perfect by any means on that offensive line, but they've done enough, and that's really all you need from them. When you can give this guy just a little bit of time to work, he's going to do incredible things. I can absolutely promise you that. So just keep him upright as much as you can throughout the rest of the season, and then maybe some things can happen. They do have you at UCF next week, and it'll be definitely a challenge for that offensive line going up against a guy like Nigel Kelly, but overall, I think this is a very dangerous team. If they win that game at UCF, they become a very interesting team in the Big 12. And then this might be it for Dave Aranda. Came into a really good situation, took them to the Big 12 title, and was a really interesting program for quite some time. If you're going to miss two opportunities, really, to defend the end zone in this game, with Will Shepard just inexplicably dropping a pass right before the Hail Mary, you can't have that happen. You just can't lose a game like that, especially if you're a defensive coach. So I have to assume that that's probably it for Dave Aranda and Baylor. I don't necessarily think it's going anywhere throughout the season. I think they'll probably stick with them throughout the season, but I think the writing's on the wall in a certain extent. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. I think Colorado is one of the more interesting teams in the entire country. That we probably knew that coming in, but they've become more interesting throughout the first couple of weeks. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports that you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.